Hi everyone. Um, we will be continuing our discussion with um, the, the coordination of all the organ systems of an amphibian body or a neuron body. So let's start off with studying the skeletal system. Okay, the skeleton itself. So take a look at the picture. That is not the skeleton of your frog. It is just an artist's illustration of how it looks like when this hardened part of your body is being calcified. Okay, so bones are made up of calcium. Okay, that sets the protective medium of your body. It protects the organs inside. Okay, and also it provides you a framework for primates and also all the living organisms, especially for those animals that have endoskeleton, which is skeleton inside their bodies. Okay, exoskeleton is for animals like insects, crustaceans, and arthropods that has a skeleton outside of their body. So for this reason, in the laboratory we're using a frog, so we will study more of the neuroskeleton. For the learning outcomes, we will differentiate the axial and appendicular skeleton. So when you say axial skeleton, that is the core of your, or the basis or the foundation of your skeletal system. Okay, the axial, like the skull, the vertebra, and the appendicular skeleton are those are the skeleton or the bones which is attached to the axis. Okay, so these are the hind limbs and your forelimbs. We will also distinguish different skeletal structures of the frog. So for the skeletal structures of the frog, we have a diagram and the figures that will be shown later, and to identify the anatomy of a neuroskeletal system. So let's first talk about the skull, the mandible, and the hyoid apparatus. So what are these for? We'll take a look at the skeleton of a neurons, which demonstrate quite dramatically the misleading assumption that many students like you have about amphibians. So they are the intermediate between fishes and higher tetrapods, a simpler version of reptiles and mammals. But that's not the case. We will take a look at the highly specialized skeletons of a frog, which is suffice to dispel such views or the misconception about them. Skeleton described here of a rana catasmiana, but its features applied to all neurons generally. So for the skull, okay, for this type of bone, it is protecting the brain, okay, and there has been a considerable loss of bone and decrease in ossification over the basal tetrapods. When I say decrease in ossification, reduce the hardening of the skull. Okay, they have this because of that ossification. It is clearly evident that it is broad, flattened, and fenestrated skull. So take a look at the figure 6.1 and 6.2 to see more of it. Among the bones commonly present in tetrapods but absent in the neurons are the following: the lacrimal. Okay, so these are found here. Okay, for lacrimal, for lacrimal glands, that's found here, the tears coming out from your eyes, the prefrontal, okay, and the postfrontal, and the opis floating. Two particularly large openings are the orbits, okay, which are found dorsally, okay, and the interthyroid vacuities ventrally on the palate. Okay, so ventrally on the palate, so here. So examining the skull in dorsal view, its margin is approximately parabolic, so it forms a parabola. On each side of this margin is composed of a small median premaxilla and the long maxilla, and the shorter quadratojugal in anterior to posterior order. So these are a formation, okay, of the premaxilla and long maxilla and shorter quadratojugal, which is anterior to posterior, so that's up to the top to bottom order. Ventrally, okay, the premaxilla and maxilla bear a single row of small teeth. We call them the premaxillary teeth and the maxillary teeth, respectively. And the vomeres lie anteriorly, so that's found on top Okay, this portion, just behind the premaxilla, they bear the vomer teeth. So the vomers are the bones, okay, and they bear the vomer teeth. So this is a dorsal view of the skeleton of the frog. So we will take a look at this part. This is the axial skeleton and the axial, okay, the basic or the basis, and the appendages will be your part of your appendicular skeleton. Phalanges, including the forelimbs and the hind limbs. This is a complete view of the skeletal system of the frog. Now I'll be reading the different parts of the dorsal and the ventral view of your frog skeleton. So the first one on the left side of dorsal view, number 1, nasal bone. Number 2, frontoparietal bone. Number 3, phalanges of the digits. So this one, phalanges. Metacarpal bones, number 4. Carpal bones for number 5. Here, the palm bones. 6 for scapula. 7, the vertebra. Okay. 8, the transverse process of sacral. And number 9 vertebra. Number 9 is the ilium. Number 10 is acetabulum. 11 is ischium. 12 is tarsal bones. 13 metatarsal bones. 14 are the phalanges of your digits. 15 the squamosal bone. 16 is quadratojugal bone. 17 the transverse process. 18 the radioulna. 19 is the suprascapula. 20 is the humerus. 21 is transverse process. 22 is the urostyle. 23 is the femur. 24 is the tibiofibula, the combination of the tibiofibula. The 25 is fibulare, or the calcaneum. And the 26 is tibiale, or the astragalus. And 27 is the distal tarsal bones. Okay? For the ventral view, I'll be reading again the bones. 1 maxilla, 2 palatine, 3 pterygoid bone, 4 exoccipital bone, 5 the clavicle here, the coracoid for number 6, 7 is the glenoid fossa, 8 is the sternum, 9 is the transverse process of the sacral, 9th vertebra, number 10 is the urostyle, 11 pubis, 12 acetabulum, 13 ischium, 14 is tarsal bone, 15 is the metatarsal bones, 16 is the phalanges of digits, 17 is premaxilla, 18 is the vomer, 19 is the dentary, 20 is parasphenoid bone, 21 phalanges of digits, 22 is the metacarpal bone, 23 is the carpal bones, 24 is the radioulna, 25 is the humerus, 26 is the ilium, 27 is the femur, 28 is the tibiofibula, 29 is the fibulare, the calcaneum, 30 is the tibiale, astragalus, and the 31 is distal tarsal bone. So these are the different major bones for the frog skeleton. So if you try to look at the skull, the dorsal view will let you show the premaxilla, the nasal, here for the nasal passages, maxilla, okay, the teeth, squamosal, okay, prootic, so this is the otic, or the eyes of your frog, okay, this lies behind the orbits. Columella, which will lead you to the auditory tube. Exoccipital, okay, sphenethmoid, and the frontoparietal. And the quadratojugal also will lead you to the outside portion of near the tympanic membrane. For the ventral view of the skull, you have the premaxilla, maxilla, sphenethmoid, parasphenoid, the optic foramen, which is the behind lies behind the two orbits of the eyes, the trigeminal foramen, the exoccipital, occipital condyle, premaxillary teeth, the maxillary teeth, the vomers and the vomerine teeth, the palatine, the interpterygoid vacuity, the pterygoid, and the jugular foramen, which is extending through the vertebra of your frog. The paired nasals are broad and flattened medially and contact each other in the dorsal midline. So this is the figure 6.2 AD and ACD. Each has a narrow process that extends lateroventrally, forming the anterior margin of the large orbits. Kasi you see that the large orbits are of the frog, okay, which is ascending, okay. It contacts the ascending process of your maxilla. So ascending process, which means an area of teeth. And nearest, the opening into the nasal cavity lies anterior to each orbit. Okay, the paired frontoparietals are elongated and flattened bones that meet along the dorsal midline to form of the cranial roof. So here is the skull and the mandible of the frog in the dorsal ventral views of the skull, left lateral view of the skull and mandible, and the left dorsolateral view of the skull. Letter E is the posterior view of the skull and the mandible. Letter F, the detail of the left otic region. So the skull and the mandible for the left lateral view, I'll read the parts: parasphenoid, the sphenoethmoid, the nasal, the premaxilla, maxilla, pterygoid, dentary, angulosplenial, frontoparietal, exoccipital, columella, optic foramen, annular cartilage, squamosal. And for the skull mandible posterior view, we have the same set of parts. For the skull left dorsolateral view, we have frontoparietal, the nasal, the nearest, the maxilla, the pterygoid, the squamosal, and the annular cartilage, which is being removed. And the detail of the otic region, the columella, the squamosal, foramen magnum, operculum, and occipital condyle. So you see the foramen magnum, which is an opening going into the brain of your frog. So what are the post-cranial skeleton for the Anuran skeleton? So this is the vertebral column, okay, with only 9 free vertebrae. So you take a look at this post-cranial skeleton, which is more specialized among Anurans because they have the highly locomotor movements, okay. So most anteriorly in the series, which means the atlas, which is the first column, which articulates with the occipital condyles of the skull, so it locks on the occipital condyles. The last 3 vertebrae is sacral vertebra, which is below, attaching the pelvic girdle, see later. And extending posteriorly from the sacral vertebra is the elongated, we call as the urostyle, a rod-like structure, which is formed by the fusion of the several post-sacral vertebra before. The vertebra has prominent transverse processes, but the ribs are lacking, okay? They don't have a rib. So for the appendicular skeleton is well developed. The pectoral girdle is largely ossified, contains several elements as shown in the figure. The scapula is nearly a plate-like structure, so it's found at the back portion. Okay, it's like a wing for humans here. Back portion, the scapula. Extending dorsomedially for it is the suprascapula, which is a prominent and a calcified cartilaginous portion medially. So ventrally, there are 2 paired elements, which is the more slender and anterior clavicles. Dermal elements extend among directly medially from the scapula, and the larger, more posterior coracoids from a plate-like base to the girdle. So this is the vertebral column and the pelvic girdle and dorsal view, the atlas, the second vertebra, to the 8th vertebra, and attaching are the transverse processes, the sacral vertebra, the urostyle, the ilium, the pubis, the left femur, acetabulum, and ischium. So the right lateral view of the view has almost the same structures. Okay, the glenoid fossa for articulation with the humerus is formed mainly by the scapula and the coracoid. An anterior median element, the omosternum, is lying anteriorly. The cartilaginous episternum extends anteriorly from it. So, and a posterior median element, which is the sternum, okay, which is found below, articulates with the procoracoids. Ibig sabihin nun, it's attaching to the procoracoids, and the cartilaginous episternum extend posteriorly from it. For the forelimbs, it includes the 3 segments, and the most proximal of which is the brachium, which is supported by the humerus. This bone extends laterally from the glenoid fossa for figure 6.1 and 6.6. The next segment is the antebrachium, which is supported by the radius, and ulna, which is fused to form radioulna. The manus is including a proximal series of small nodular carpals, followed by 4 complete digits, including the metacarpals 2 and through 5, and the phalanges, which is included in chapter 5. We have 2 medial digits, each bearing 2 phalanges, and the lateral 2 bear 3 phalanges each, and a small prepollex extends medially from the carpals and may represent a reduced metacarpal. In the pelvic girdle, the pelvis is formed each side by the ilium, ischium, and pubis. The slender ilium is an elongated anteriorly directed element with a well-developed iliac crest. The ischium and pubis together outline a semicircle in lateral view, and the ischium forming the more posterior portion. So for the pectoral girdle dorsal view, I'll read the labels: ossified cartilage, suprascapula, episternum, obosternum, scapula, the clavicle, the procoracoid, the sternum, symphysternum, and the right humerus, and almost the same structures in the ventral view. For the left lateral view of the pectoral girdle of the frog, we have the episternum, the obosternum, the procoracoid, suprascapula, scapula below, and glenoid fossa, sternum, and the symphysternum. So the acetabulum is a conspicuous depression for articulation with the femur. The hind limb consisting of the proximal femur, followed by the tibia and the fibula, fused to form the tibiofibula. The pes has rather typical metatarsals and phalanges, but a modification in the tarsal region produces another functional segment of the hind limb, a feature that is related to the saltatory locomotion of the frogs. Here, the 2 proximal tarsals are elongated to form the medial tibiale and the lateral fibulary, or called the calcaneum, which are partly fused, at their ends. The tibiale and fibulary are commonly viewed as the equivalent for the astragalus in the calcaneum, respectively a larger tarsal elements of the amniotes. Although this does not indeed seem to be the case of the fibulary, the tibiale is not homologous with the astragalus. As noted by O'Keefe et al. In 2006, the amniote astragalus is apparently a fusion of as many of the 4 amniote tarsal elements. The distal tarsals have more typical nodular form, and there are 5 digits, with the first being shortest and the 4th being the longest. Digits 1 and 2 each bear the 2 phalanges, 3 and 5, 3, and 4, 4. A small prehalux, similar to the prepollex, extends medially from the tarsal region. So here I'll read the right antebrachium in the manus of the frog in dorsal view, the radioulna, the ulna and the radius, articular fossa, the carpals or the wrist, palm, metacarpals, and the phalanges. So this is the skeletal system of the frog. The more of that will be discussed in your lecture, and as long as we're concerned, we're only be talking about the anatomy of the frog skeletal system. So if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to drop a question in our virtual classroom or in the chat box. Thank you so much for listening.